Hey everyone, welcome back. It is Icon. Thank you so much for checking out another episode of Esports Analysis. In today's video, we have some more breaking news. I'm not quite sure what's going on in the CDL right now. Just over the last couple weeks, of course, we know what's happened with Gunless, but it seems like there are some roster shakeups, and every time this happens, I'm usually not a fan of it. As soon as I think about roster shakeups, I think back to what happened with LAG, how they subbed out. Of course, we know what happened with Aches and some of the other vets that were on that team. They subbed in the young guns, and then now they've just been in the basement of everybody's power rankings. So I don't love these moves, especially since Florida is just coming off a win a couple events ago. We'll dive into all this, but of course, the thing that I'm talking about, I'm sure you guys read the title, is the rumor out there is that Maux has been dropped, or at least he has been benched. And before we really dive into this, I will say that this wasn't tweeted by like Florida Mutineers, right? This isn't official. There wasn't like a press release or anything like that. But all the signs are pointing that way, and we'll cover it all. And then we'll also look at the stats a little bit, because my channel is super analytical. When I break things down, I like to analyze things as in-depth as I can. So we'll go through, and I do want to look at stats, want to look at recent finishes and stuff like that, so that we have a little bit of a background for what's going on with the Florida Mutineers. But before we get into that, I got my Dallas Empire shirt on today. It's got the Dallas down the sleeves. It's got the Empire here on the back. There's a big Dallas Empire. These are my favorite shirts. If you go to the CDL shop, they have every one of these shirts for every team. I just absolutely love them. This is like the fourth team. I have Minnesota, I have Atlanta's, I have Dallas. I try to get Chicago's, but it's all sold out. So the colors, if I like them, I just ended up buying them. It's not like it's my favorite team or anything. But with that, let's go ahead. Let's get into the details here. So first thing that I'll show you guys is I was browsing through Twitter, and I came across this tweet from CDL Intel. This is how it all kind of kicked off, but it said, Moxa Benched, where's Prestinni going? What about Gunless? 3 of them followed Awakening, and the rest of this is just kind of whatever. It's just a little bit of speculation, but this is where I very first came across it. And then after that, I went over and I looked at Mox's Twitter, and he tweeted this. So Maux said, the worst feeling in the world is realizing the miles that you went for people, that they would not go inches for you. Then in a reply to that tweet, he also said, and yes, I'm feeling this, I'm effing hurt. So there's definitely something going on there, right? And it sounds like he has been benched. Again, no official release, but that's where all the signs are pointing. And then if you go down underneath and you kind of look through this, the first reply that's obviously getting the most traction is from Prestinni, because he's kind of in a similar scenario with what has happened with him earlier on in the year. I know that he wasn't benched. He left for personal reasons, but still, he would obviously know the feeling of where Maux is at right now. He says, you're going to be all right, kiddo. Don't be hurt over it. Find the positives and grow from it. I know you will. Let me know if you want to talk. And then, of course, Maux responds to that by saying, love you, bro. I know my real ones. If you were to go back through and look at the rest of these replies, you have some stuff from Nubsy, so obviously the coach of the Seattle Surge. You have some other supportives you go throughout this thread, but all scenarios here are kind of pointing to the fact that Chance has indeed been dropped, and I don't know, I feel bad for him, and by all means, none of us know what's going on like behind the scenes, right? We don't know how players are interacting. We don't know if people aren't getting along. We don't know if somebody's like what's happening with Chicago, if somebody's waking up late and they're not dependable. We don't know any of that. So keep that in the back of your mind, that there are still probably some details that have to be ironed out and have to be thrown out there. But for me, this overall, and I'm going to look at stats in a minute, seems like a super overreaction, because just a few tournaments ago, Florida was on top. I know that at their home event, CDL Florida, they went 0-2. They were 0-6 in map count. They got booted, didn't even make it to the semifinals so that they could play for the championship of their home event. But before that, I mean, they looked really good, right? I had them after the event they won. I had them like 4th or 5th in my power rankings, even as high as you could consider them in that 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th range, anywhere throughout there. You could consider Florida. Now, after this last event, who knows what's going on there, but I just feel like this is a little bit of an overreaction, and I'm not really quite sure if it's justified. So with that, let me go ahead. Let's dive into our stats a little bit here. So as I bring this up, I will say that this is by @CamAllen on Twitter. If I move this over just a second, you can see up in the top right-hand corner. If you want some really awesome stats, go follow this guy on Twitter. Whenever I'm doing my breakdowns and I'm kind of following along the tournaments, this is where I look for stats. I definitely don't go through and record all this stuff like he does. So if you want to go ahead and follow him, please, it's @CamAllen with 2 N's. But with that, this is, I wanted to go back to how he performed like when they won the event. And this is the summary. Hopefully you guys can see it. This is the summary of their 3-1 victory over Minnesota. And when I was looking at this, I wanted to go back, and I remember having a pretty decent event. I wanted to look and I see, well, did he struggle in that event, right? Did the entire rest of his team come out and fry and he struggled? So this was like kind of the beginning of it. So as we go back and we look at this, we can see that Maux is down here. So everybody from Florida is down here at the bottom. And if we're looking at these stats, I'm a little bit kind of taken aback by just how good these stats are. Let me blow them up so that you guys can see exactly what we're looking at here. So as I look at these, the first thing I see is that overall KD. So this column right here talks about overall KD. And if you're looking at the people that really came out and fried, Pharaoh had a 1.4 KD overall. He was just insane the entire weekend. He ended up getting MVP of that event. He was off the walls. And then after that was Skies. Again, Skies, Man-AR for Florida. He has been playing out of his mind all weekend. He had a 1.33 KD. But right after that, Maux had a 1.24. And in this game for an SMG that's playing super fast, a 1.24 is nothing to scoff at, right? That is super impressive. Whereas if you look at the SMGs from the rest of the people on his team, Havoc had a 1.07 and Frosty had a 0.9. Then if you were to go through and look at like some of the other game modes, Maux had a 1.1, whereas Havoc and Frosty had a 0.9 in Hardpoint. Way better, right? Much more production from him. In Search and Destroy, he did have the lowest on his team. So he had a 1.0 KD in Search and Destroy, whereas his teammates had 1.6, 2.2, 1.2, 1.3. So he had the lowest KD. But when you look at Domination, Maux had a 2.14, and then that was only bested by Pharaoh, who, again, we just talked about, was the MVP of this event, had an absolutely insane Domination, 2.25. But to go 2.143 as a Domination KD, that is insane in this game, right? You don't see that very often at all. Let alone, you don't see, if we're just talking about like what you see normally, you don't see like a 1.2 very often in a lot of these game modes. And he had a 2.2 basically. So if we're looking back to how he did in that championship game of the event they won, he was super solid, right? Now, let's go ahead and let's dive a little bit deeper. So after this, again, CamAllen goes through, he has this spreadsheet, you can go check it out, and he goes every single tournament and he lists the stats for all of these. So when I decided to do that, this is from just the Florida event, okay? So this is the event they got absolutely smoked on. You can go through, you can look at every single team, every single player, kind of look at their stats. And when I'm looking at this, I was thinking, well, when they got beat 0-2, so they lost 2 games, they were out, 0-6 map count. How did he do there? So obviously here, Skies and Pharaoh, they had a 1.04, 1.13 as an overall KD. And I think everybody would agree that Pharaoh and Skies are the 2 most consistent players on that roster. But when I look a little bit deeper, Maux had a 0.76, Havoc had a 0.82, and Frosty had a 0.73. So was he the worst? No. I mean, Frosty was the worst. Again, we just kind of went over those stats from the last event. But he wasn't even the worst. He was bad. Let's not beat around the bush here. He didn't have a good tournament. He didn't have a good showing, but he wasn't even the worst. And then if we dive a little bit deeper, look at like Hardpoint, Now, this is where things get a little bit iffy, and we just showed how good he played at domination, right? But if we look at hardpoint, in the last event, Mox had a 0.56 KD for the event in hardpoint. That is struggling quite a bit, right? That's not like, okay, I had like a 0.85. Like sometimes you'll see from JCap, and he got dropped, or Enable, like the big time players that have been dropped, you see like a 0.8 somewhere in there. You're like, okay, maybe it's justified, but for the role that they play, maybe not. So Mox dropping a 0.56 in hardpoint, that's pretty questionable, right? And then Search and Destroy, he had a 1.0. And then his Dom KD was 0.93. But we kind of know that in domination, he plays a lot better, at least from prior stats. So that's just the last event. Search and Destroy, he had a 1 KD. That's all right. If you're looking in terms of a 1 KD, that was the best on his team. Pharaoh had a 1, but Skies had a 0.92. Frosty had a 0.7, and Havoc had a 0.6. So when we're talking about Search and Destroy, he was the best on their team. And then when you're looking at domination, he was third best on their team. So just to kind of recap here, hardpoint, he was absolutely worst on their team. But Search, he was the best. And domination, he was the third best. So is this justified? I don't know. It feels like you could point fingers in other places and probably have a better cause for somebody being benched. Again, I don't want to say that definitely this person should have been or definitely that person should have been. I'm just trying to make sense of all the news and all of the roster changes that are happening in the CDL. Again, we don't know what's going on behind the scene. We don't know if anybody's showing up late or whatever, but it seems like by the stats, maybe he had a bad tournament, but so did their entire team, right? The rest of the team was also pretty bad. Last thing I wanted to go over was I wanted to just go back and make sure I was covering all my bases. And this is if we're looking at the 2020 season overall. So now we're taking all the LAN events, all the online events, and I wanted to check the stats for this. And if we're looking at this in terms of the respawn KDs, so Skies and Pharaoh, obviously the best players on their team. They've been doing it all year long. But for overall KDs, Mox is next at 0.99. It's not great, right? It's not like Huke, who has a 1.02, and I'm looking right above here. So it's not like he has like a 1.1 or a 1.2. It's not like he's frying, but it's not terrible. It's not the worst that we've seen this year for sure. And then if we look at hardpoint, this is where things get a little bit iffy. Remember we said he's playing really well at domination. Hardpoint, except for when Prestinni was there, he's the worst on their team. So Skies and Pharaoh are the best, and then Frosty, Havoc, and then Mox. So Mox is at 0.93. He's the worst on their team. And then if you go over and you look at Search and Destroy, everybody on their team is struggling at Search and Destroy. So he's at a 0.9, but basically everybody else on their team is struggling also. So sure, he has a really bad KD, but Havoc has a 0.9, Frosty has a 0.88, Pharaoh has a 0.88. So yeah, he's struggling, but the entire team has struggled for the entire year in Search and Destroy. Then when you're looking at one game type that kind of defines him, that's domination, and he has a 1.1. So Pharaoh has a 1.19, Skies has a 1.15, and then Mox has a 1.1. So I just I don't know, I wanted to make sure that when we were looking at this, I was providing some depth in this, because I didn't just want to say, well, Skies has been really good at domination and he hasn't been good at the other two, so maybe he deserves it, right? That's not the approach that I wanted to take. I wanted to make sure that I was backing up what I was telling you with some analytics and some stuff of substance, right? There was some substance behind what I was saying. So the last thing that I'll say before we head on our way is that this could all change, right? He could tweet again tomorrow that, okay, everything's been worked out, I'm still on the squad, I'm not being benched or whatever, but that's just not how it appears. So as we move forward from here, kind of keep an eye on his Twitter handle, keep an eye on Florida's account, just because I do want to see what's happening. Is Prestinni being subbed back in For me personally, that's really the only thing that kind of makes sense. Maybe Prestinni's ready to play again, and Maux might have been having some issues, wasn't showing up on time. I don't know. This is all total speculation. I'm just trying to make sense because as a whole, it really doesn't make sense, right? So I'm trying to make sense of all of these moves when at first glance, when I first saw it, I was like, wait, what do you mean? Like Maux is in like Maux for Florida? Like they're jumping hit like the team that just won an event 3 events ago or 2 events ago or whatever. It just, I don't know. So with that, guys, any comments you have, make sure you go ahead, put them down below. I'm really interested to see what you guys have to say on this one. The last time we did a video like this, I was super intrigued by what you guys thought, who you thought might be taking his place and stuff like that. So make sure you leave a comment down below. I'm really interested to see what you guys have to say. If you're new around here, I put out brand new videos like this every single day. So make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the news here in the near future. Leave a like before you head on your way. It super helps out the channel. And with that, guys, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. I will talk to you on Monday morning.